Well, welcome everybody, and it's my great pleasure to welcome this evening Meaghan Delahunt. I should really say welcome back, because Meaghan taught creative writing here for 8 years until this summer, and then moved to her current post at the University of Stirling. Meaghan's a very successful novelist and short story writer, and her work includes the novel In the Blue House, which was nominated for the 2002 Orange Prize, won the Saltire First Book Prize, and a Commonwealth Prize for Best First Book. It was followed by The Red Book, which was published in 2008, and To the Island, which was published 2 years ago, and that's one of the works Meaghan is going to be reading from this evening. She's also recently published a pamphlet on the artist and nationality, which was commissioned by the Saltire Society, and entirely coincidentally, the referendum vote is going to be exactly a year from now, so that's actually a very timely pamphlet to be discussing this evening as well. Meaghan was born in Australia and has lived in Scotland for some years now, and I think it would be true to say that most of your works do deal with the issue of travel, nationality and cultural identity. Would that be a fair summary?
Probably. I write the stuff. I think it's other people who make that comment on it. But,
yes. But you're described as a Scottish writer now, aren't you?
Yeah, in Australia, yes, certainly.
And here,
and in Europe too.
In Europe. Mm. Yes. And so the novel that we're going to be reading from is about an Australian who travels not to Scotland but to Greece in the course of the novel. Would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, it's about an Australian woman and a dancer, an ex-dancer, who is travelling to Greece to find her birth father. And she finds him on the island of Naxos, and he's been there in kind of self-imposed exile. And yeah, their relationship's quite fraught, because he never expected to have this adult child turning up on his doorstep on a Greek island. And he's had to learn how to live on this island in the wake of the dictatorship in Greece, which was in the late 60s to the mid-70s. And so he's been living there and living this hermetic kind of life, and then suddenly he has a daughter and a grandchild because Lena, the woman, she brings her young child to find this father or grandfather as well. So I guess that's broadly it. And I thought I'd read a section where Lena is actually coming to meet the father for the first time, and then a little bit when they do meet, when you'll see the kind of relationship between them. So is that what we're going to now? Okay. But she was here now, on this road, on her bicycle. I'm going to meet my father. She kept repeating it to herself, as if in repetition it would sink in, become true, like a muscle worked over and over, a body memory. The road became less even, more winding and full of potholes and cracks, patched in places with fresh black tar. As it dipped down into the village, bamboo fringed the road and divided the farms from each other, forming windbreaks. Great stalks of agave, trees in their own right, reached up. A huge trunk of agave had fallen across the road, and she had to cycle around it. The sun was warm at her back, but a cool wind beat her face. At the bus stop, just past the sign to the village, she got off the bike. This was where the man, Stephanos, had told her to wait. She tried to read a photocopied sheet stapled to an electricity pylon. It showed an animal with its throat cut. She couldn't make out the animal, but as she read, she realized it was about dogs, about the murder of dogs, in this village and in neighboring villages. Her reading in Greek still wasn't good. She was very slow, mouthing out the words to herself, trying to understand. In the field opposite, a man walked behind a donkey, slapping its flanks, ensuring the hoe ploughed straight. She stopped to watch, to marvel over this ancient way of doing things. Further along, in an adjacent field, A man with a tractor was doing exactly the same work. She wondered which man she was supposed to meet. It was just after 2. The man with the plough frowned when he saw her, tethered his donkey and walked to the edge of the field. He called out, "Welcome," in English, but the greeting was without warmth. He was a slight man with a neat beard, not much taller than herself, a tanned face under a blue cap. They shook hands formally. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow. She saw that his hands were scarred and burn marks tracked up his forearms. His grip was strong and she winced a little. She had a band-aid on her right palm where the cuts from the stolen badge were slow to heal. "My name is Andreas," he said, pulling down his shirt sleeves. "I'm Lena." She was sweating. Words deserted her. Greek, English, everything she prepared. She tried to speak again. He saw the plaster. "Your hand is sore?" "Ben birazi," she said. "No matter." Her self-inflicted wounds. She pushed up her sunglasses and he studied her face. It came as a shock to see himself there. The eyes. It was true then, he thought to himself. After all this time, the girl. Marsula had warned him. Stefanos had been right. The child had come here. The grown-up child. I'm just going to look forward a little bit. He's cooked a big meal for her and things are not going well. The air was fraught between them. She put down her fork. "I have some questions," she said. "And I must warn you," he said in Greek, putting his own fork down. "Perhaps no answers." Then he picked up his fork again to put rice and spinach on his plate, took a few mouthfuls and stopped, reached over for a slice of cheese. He drew a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and then a lighter and put both on the table between them. Lena looked hungrily at the cigarettes. She thought of the stolen packet in her bag, 3/4 full. She could ration herself. She could be disciplined. She could wait until she was alone. Andreas also looked at the cigarettes on the table, patted them as if for reassurance, for later, and returned to his food, some kind of smoker's tick. She recognized the gesture. And now that the cigarettes were there between them, she found it hard to think of anything else. "Your mother speaks bad of me, I know. She has nothing good to say. How can it be different?" His hand moved to the cigarettes. "I understand." Lena wanted to say, "You have no idea." Instead, she said, "You understand." He smiled. "Yes." He paused and smiled again. "But she is wrong." On her mother's behalf, she wanted to protest, but he put up a hand to stay her. He cleared his throat. "This man now and the man who knew your mother are 2 different things." Despite herself, she said, "You're sure?" "Ah, I left you all these years as if I hadn't a daughter. But I knew of you. Of course." He looked at her quickly to see how she would take this and continued. "She sent me a letter, but I was young. It was a different time. A hard time." His voice was suddenly forced and sharp at the edges. "I'm not the good father. I don't understand family." He leant back in his chair and sighed. "What do you want from me?" After this outburst, she kept silent for a while. She too leant back in her chair. "I don't know," she said simply. What could she tell him without seeming lost, without seeming ridiculous? She reached for her wineglass. "Po, po, po," he said sadly, leaning forward and extracting a cigarette. "You are here to be disappointed." Lena sat there, forcing small bites of lukewarm food into her mouth, food that she didn't want. What she wanted was a cigarette. Inside herself, she was curled up into a small ball. Inside herself, she was a child and she wanted to get away. And I'm just going to run back a little bit. "Greece. What do you think of Greece?" he asked awkwardly, changing the subject. "I like Greece," she said. "I love it." "The first visit?" "No." "You came before?" He clearly hadn't expected this. He raised his eyebrows, took a deep inhale. "I was in Athens many years ago. I stayed for 10 days. And you didn't come here?" His tone was suspicious. "No." It wasn't the right time. He paused, tried to gauge her, how far to push. And now is the right time? Maybe. And you love it here? He was suddenly on the attack. What does that mean? You love the politics? You love that we are the poor man of Europe? All foreigners, they come for the sun, for the sea, but understand nothing. Where I come from, she shot back, we have sun and sea. Of course, his voice sarcastic. You come for the culture. Not culture stunt, either. Ah, Australia is so new, he said. Australia is so old. To a colonial mentality, it's new. He sat back, nodded to himself, looked at her with approval. Bravo, the colonial mentality, he smiled. You're clever. I know. She matched his tone, but I don't need to be tested. She was tired. He knew nothing about her, and it was tedious, she thought, having to prove her intelligence. With a certain kind of man, it was always the same, having to prove herself in this way. She was too old for this sort of conversation. You are right, you are left. More left than right, she said, I guess. You guess? You don't know? Politics isn't really my thing. Daxi, okay, he said impatiently, okay, and tapped out another cigarette. But the colonial mentality, that is good, smart. He then gave her a short lecture on the history of Australia, the long history of Aboriginal people, the abuses of the British, as if she knew nothing. She listened politely, nodded and smiled in all the right places. Not for the first time, she thought to herself, women are too polite, I'm too polite. She swallowed more wine, looked longingly at the cigarettes, and choked back her annoyance. Now I'm just going to brush your head here. He said abruptly, what is your work? I'm a dancer. Then she corrected herself. A dance teacher. A dancer. He took in her slight frame, almost boyish, no chest to speak of, long defined limbs. A dancer, he repeated. From what he remembered of her mother, there was little resemblance. He had to admit that she looked Greek. He had to admit, despite himself, that she looked like him. You look like a dancer, he said, but too thin, you are sick? She felt pleased when he said she looked like a dancer. My vanity is still intact, she thought, the only thing intact. I'm okay, she said, although she wasn't okay, not at all. She closed around herself and her hurts. I eat, I'm fine. She was trying to heal up from the operation, but she wasn't about to tell him that. You do the Greek dancing? No, she responded seriously, too seriously. Contemporary dance. Oh. She could see he didn't understand. How old when you started? From young, she said in Greek. I trained, I toured, then... She didn't have the words to describe the end of her dancing career, to have no energy for dancing, to exist on 500 calories a day, an apple and a Diet Coke, amphetamines and cigarettes, to make yourself sick to the point where the thing you most love is the thing you can't do anymore. He raised his eyebrows, looked puzzled. I took time out from my dancing. And then I became a teacher, she said, and then hesitated. I haven't danced in a long while, and I'm getting older. It's been a hard year, she said without looking up. She was sick of words. She felt unable to articulate anything. She had a sudden desire to get up and move in the old way, to fully inhabit the moment, to lose herself, to show how she truly felt. A woman on a stage with one shoe, a woman on a stage by herself, trying to find her way back. These days, I teach, she went on. I teach children at the primary school. You like this work? I like it, she paused. Mostly. It fulfilled a part of herself. She loved the kids. At least he's asking questions, she thought, though it felt more like an interrogation. At least he's not lecturing me. You like it as much as the dancing? For me, dancing was different, she said, without hesitation, without smiling. Dancing was life.
Thank you so much for that. I love the way that you describe the awkwardness of that first meeting between them, but you also have undercurrents going through there which emerge later, without wanting to spoil the plot for those who haven't read it, but that very first image of the photocopied poster with the dog with its throat cut, and then the hint that something has happened to the father with the burn marks on his arm. I love the way you unfold that so slowly in that way.
Yeah, I didn't actually realise there was some kind of connection actually until I was reading it then. You don't know what you seed a lot of the imagery, I think, until it's over, and then even when it's over you're not sure. Oh, that thing about the dogs, I'd forgotten that was in there, you know. And that is actually, that was quite an issue on the island of Naxos where this is set, in a particular village that I've been going to for 20 years. There was a whole spate of these dogs with their throats slit, and it was quite a strange, nobody knew who was doing it, and there was a strange sense of threat at the edge of the village. It was a very odd thing, and so I was surprised that I'd slipped that into the novel. I'd forgotten that I'd done that.
And the novel really covers 40 or 50 years of recent Greek history in one way and another through the gradual revelation of the past. It's a terrific picture of recent Greek history. It's also a very interesting picture of the Australian view coming into the Greek situation there. I was particularly struck there that you've played quite a lot with the idea of cuisine and eating and so on. I mean, the dancer clearly has an eating description. Yeah. But there's a great deal in the novel about living from the land, and the man's a farmer, he harvests his own crops, etc.
He cooks.
Quite a deliberate contrast in terms of the different cultures, do you think?
Yeah, in terms of those two specific individuals, and I think what they've been through, I think probably there is a lot about body memory. Nina carries a lot of scars from her kind of past, and her eating disorder as a dancer and things like that. And Andreas has had to learn from being a city boy and then putting himself in self-imposed exile on this island, learning the ways of his grandparents, and it always strikes me when I go back, because I can't cook, I'm not interested in cooking, I'm just terrible. And so I go back, I go to Greece and everyone's cooking, and I have them over to the house, and thank God my partner's he's a great cook. But I was asked to do a kind of, what was it? Somebody wanted to, after they'd read this novel, they wanted to commission me to write. They thought I knew about food, and about cuisine and how to. I said, I don't have a clue about any of that stuff. This is just from observing my neighbours and trying to learn from them and not look too stupid. Actually, when I am in Greece, and particularly on the island, because if you live on an island, you have access to food, which is the big issue in Greece at the moment, because if you're in Athens or Thessaloniki or one of the big cities, and it's so, your wages have been slashed, your pension's been slashed, food's quite an issue. So of course people that live very close to food, it's got a friend, the teachers or the local vet, and they all have their farms, and so this Xeni who can't cook is just it's shocking to them. Yeah. But, so I try and fit in and try and learn how to make spanakopita and stuff like that. But no, it's funny that the book is full of food, but it's probably more my own fascination, but also the way she sees it. It's through her eyes, and also from her perspective of having struggled with this kind of eating disorder. So it's quite a shock for her to be surrounded, I think, culturally by all this stuff. Although, I make the point, Lena is brought up in Melbourne. I was brought up in Melbourne, which is, as any Greek will tell you, is the third largest Greek city in the world. And so, I grew up with a lot of this. It's familiar to me.
But in many ways, the father is not really typically Greek, is he? I mean, although he is farming and living from the land and so on. He had to learn that. He's actually a boy from Southerners originally. So in a sense, you see him learning his Greekness as well. You know, on one level, he seems to be typically Greek, but also he's not sociable. He's very much an introvert. He doesn't want to join in with the community, and that's seen as quite unacceptable in some ways.
Yeah, it's seen as very strange. You know, to have this, to be by yourself in Greece is seen as very strange. You know, to go and sit in a cafe by yourself. And it's taken me years to realise how strange I look in a cafe. I'm there and I'm very happy and I've got a coffee and I've got my book and I'm writing, and now I realise what a weirdo I seem, because you don't see, you know, it's not part of Greek culture to go and do it. It seems as if you don't, you know, kanome pareia, we make a company. You know, if my friends find out that I've been to the cinema by myself, they don't like it. You know, they think it's very odd, or that somebody saw you in town and you were in the cafe and you were by yourself. And I go, you know, this is very odd. Yeah. So to create a character that had withdrawn from the kind of cultural mold for very specific reasons, you know, and he doesn't have a family that he knows of until the daughter turns up with the grandson. So, and he has to learn to be a father and a grandfather, which is all hanging in the balance, I guess, at the end. And as the novel goes on, he's kind of struggling with the cultural norms in a way that his political experience has placed him outside of, I guess.
On a darker note, would you like to say something about the whole theme of betrayal in the novel, which is really quite a somber part of it?
Yeah, I guess there's lots of different forms of betrayal in the book. Even on one level, I guess Lena feels a little bit betrayed by her mother in terms of their relationship. And then I guess you have the big political betrayals of, you know, when a state turns on its inhabitants in the way that the Greek state did. And these dangerous murmurings at the moment of similar, you know, ongoing things in Greece, turning against progressive people, dissidents, university lecturers who are not, you know, vaguely left of centre. And, you know, I specifically made Andreas an ex-university lecturer because that was quite common at the end of the 60s and 70s, that a lot of university lecturers had to go into exile, betrayed often by their own students, you know, for better grades, but actually, you know, under the cover of saying this man is a communist. You know. So there was a lot. There's all those kind of levels of betrayal, I think, when the body politic turns on its citizens and so on. And yes, and then Andreas's fears that he's betrayed this woman that he loved. And I guess there's a lot about torture as the great betrayal. And,
very hard to read some of those pages on the... Yes, I won't say too much. On a more optimistic note, the role of the child is quite interesting as well. I mean, I suppose she could have been childless, but you have her one son that she takes, and he meets his grandfather.
Yeah, and what a responsibility having the child. You know, I had to always, any little scene, like, where's Alex? Where is the child? Who's looking after the boy? What's he doing now? You know, I was talking to a friend about this who has a child, and I'd finished the book, and I said, "Who's this child?" And I had to, God, looking after the child. And she said, "I'm glad you realise that." She said, "I read so many books, you know, so many novels where a child is introduced and then nobody's looking after the child. You know, who's caring for this child?" And she said, "As a mother, I'm always looking at, you know, where is this child now?" And, you know, and so I was really, really conscious of that. It was like having my own child through the book, you know. Has he had enough to eat? Is he warm enough? Who's looking after him? You know, if they're having a conversation, where's Alex? You know, the great thing about setting it on a Greek island, though, is that the kid can be anywhere in the neighbourhood, you know, as long as you can hear the kid. You know, kind of the collective responsibility. But yeah, I think he has quite I didn't realise again until the book was out in the world, you know, he has quite a pivotal role, I think. Because, and I'm interested in that intergenerational things, you know, that young children can form that bond with the grandparents that often, you know, it can bypass a tension in the relationship between the parent and the grandparent, if you know what I mean. It can skip a generation. And here, the child is the one that kind of gets under everyone's skin, gets under this cranky grandfather who's lived on the island and helps to humanise him a little bit, I think. And Lena is in that strange maternal position of kind of envying her child for his ease, you know, the ease with the grandfather, the ease that she doesn't have. And so, yeah, there's all those
seems to move freely, doesn't it? I mean, physically, he just darts about,
yeah.
And the adults are all constrained in one way or another physically, but
he becomes a little free island child, you know. But also like children that have often, you know, grown up with one parent and the mother, you know, I mean, what I found too with Alex, you know, he's always watching his mother. He's got his little satellite eyes tracking the mother and tracking the relationship between the grandfather and the daughter, you know, father and daughter. So, yeah, but I think he has quite a central little role, you know, yeah. I enjoyed writing him. I think he was fun in that, you know, because he's not, you know, I think children are not completely innocent. They know what's going on. They watch parents, they watch adults. They're in this world that's very difficult for him. And he's come from Australia and he didn't want to come to Greece to look for this man, you know. And now he's in Greece and he, I don't like him. I'm a little island boy now. You know, he adapts in a way that the adults are more rigid, aren't they? For that kind of adaptation.
Thank you. That's been excellent. The other work that you're going to read from is Total Contrast.
Yes,
not work.
Non-fiction. I feel very, very vulnerable.
The artist and nationality is available from the Salthouse Society, isn't it?
You can order it online. And there's only 500 limited edition. I'm doing a plug for the Salthouse Society because there's 3 of these beautifully designed Alistair Gray limited edition collector's items. The first one was by Richard Holloway, and that was the case for Secular Scotland. And then my one's the second one, The Artist and Nationality. And the third one's coming out on Friday, which is about freedom of expression and so on by Scottish Pen. So, and I applaud the Saltire for doing, you know, it's a cultural intervention in this 12 months leading up to the referendum. And it's apparently the Saltire Society had this kind of reputation in the early days, the 30s and 40s. They used to publish pamphlets like this, cultural interventions. Is that right? Everybody's nodding. You know, it was kind of, and so this revived, revamped Saltire Society are trying to do this again, which I think is fantastic. You know, they really are a reinvigorated kind of thing now, society now. So I was very honoured to be asked to contribute to the debate, and then I found it one of the most difficult things I've ever written. I was cursing them. Yes, I found that the only way into this, I couldn't make it a kind of academic or very distanced thing because of my own dual nationality as an Irish Australian and having lived in Scotland for so long. But then also, you know, the specific circumstances of the period that I was writing this, which was right at the beginning of the year, just after my mother's death. And so suddenly 20 years of being in Scotland was a very different proposition for me. And I realised that if I was writing about a period of uncertainty in Scotland, I was also writing about my own uncertainty. And I guess, you know, the political and the personal really collide here. And really, I guess what I'm arguing for, if I'm arguing for anything, is, you know, a revolutionary principle of uncertainty. And but I thought I'd just read a couple of little excerpts from this. I want a snowflake to land on my tongue. I sit quiet in the back seat of the taxi, looking out at the white streets. Eventually I say to the driver, "This snow, it's a miracle." "It's a what?" He takes the measure of me in the mirror. "A miracle." How long have you been here? His tone is world-weary, implying one Scottish winter too many. 20 years, I said. He laughs. He's not expecting this. And it's still a miracle. I grew up in Australia. He laughs again, delighted, because like any Edinburgh taxi driver I've ever come across, he has family in Australia. In this exchange, I see myself as the taxi driver sees me. By my accent, not from here, but then, after our discussion of 2 decades of Edinburgh weather, the trams, city council scandals, and whether Scotland will ever be independent, he sees that I'm not exactly from there anymore either. In fact, I'm a local with family on the other side of the world, just like him. I'm not a refugee, a displaced person, an asylum seeker, or an economic migrant. I came to Scotland almost in passing. When we arrived in early 1992, my Scottish partner had been away for 10 years. It was about time he saw his family again. We thought it would be something temporary, that we'd live and work here for a while and then go somewhere else. After 6 months, we put down £1,000 each to buy a 1-bedroom flat in the street where we'd been renting. After 3 years, we did indeed go away for a while to live in Greece and Australia, and then, to our surprise, we came back. It's something of a shock to wake up 2 decades down the track to find we're still here. I've now lived longer in our wee Edinburgh flat than I ever did in the family home in Melbourne. The place I thought was temporary has actually been my home. It's going to be emotional. I'm Irish Australian. My paternal grandparents went to Australia in 1923. My father was born either a few weeks or a few months after, I'm never sure. In any case, he was conceived in Ireland and born in Australia. And I wonder what it must have been like for my grandmother, that long journey by ship from Newry, long months at sea, heavily pregnant, to go to a place on the other side of the world, a place she could only imagine, and to make a new life from nothing, to escape the politics and the poverty of the homeland. This is an Australian story, and everyone there has a version of it. Often the contemporary stories from Asia, Africa, or the Middle East involve people smuggling, drowning, or attacked by pirates in the Timor Sea. These stories involve months or even years languishing in terrible conditions in asylum centres, waiting to see if they'll be deported. To be an Australian, if you are not Aboriginal, is to be from somewhere else. Nationality comes hyphenated. Australia is an immigrant nation, Australian critic and editor Ivor Indig wrote in 1998. Its character is essentially international. Irish Australian, Lebanese Australian, Greek Australian, Vietnamese Australian, and so on. This is how Australians, if they are not Indigenous, proclaim nationality. The fact that we are immigrants, each new wave sedimented over the next, and all sedimented over the fact of Aboriginal dispossession, means that we can easily forget the origins of our country. As each wave of immigrants settles in the new land and makes good, if you like, they too forget they're from somewhere else, and that life in the lucky country has been built at someone else's expense, black people's expense. It's a form of Australian cultural amnesia to believe you've always been there. It's not uncommon to hear established post-war migrants complain about the newly arrived or Aboriginal people. I was fortunate. My father and mother never lost sight of the fact that they were from somewhere else, and cultivated in us an awareness of what it must be like to be the woman on the boat, the child refugee, the man who lands with only the clothes on his back. I grew up with a keen sense from my parents and my religious background that these people are not other, a heartbeat ago, in fact. These people were us. I'm just going to sit forward a little bit now. Perhaps closest to how I feel, as opposed to think, about the question of my dual nationality is this: I feel complicated. A year ago it would have been less complicated, but I write this in the wake of my mother's death. The house I grew up in has been sold, and after 20 years we've just sold our Edinburgh flat. There's movement and upheaval all round, and mostly I feel at a loss. The upheaval at a psychic level has been sudden and tsunami-like, hitting me when I got back to Scotland after the funeral. I know I'm not alone in these feelings, that in fact it's common after the death of a parent, especially the last surviving parent. A friend told me that after the death of his mother, he had a strong, unaccountable pull to Renfrewshire, to his family home, that he had never felt before. When I asked what he thought this was all about, he said quite simply, going back to the womb. As Kathleen Janey puts it in her poem, Swifts, deserts, moonlit oceans, heat climbing from 1,000 coastal cities are as nothing now, say our terse screams. The cave dark we were born in calls us back. Okay, is that through to the end? English I'm not, as language though, you're mine. This line is from Douglas Dunn's poem, English, a Scottish essay. A few lines later the poet says, not nationality, but language. Yes, I think to myself, as a writer, as an artist, my true home is in words. I discussed this with a friend of mine, a dear writer friend, opposed to independence. She says, the artist has no nationality. Yes, I say, artistically speaking, I agree. But I find I can only agree with this statement up to a point. Up to which point is the question. It brings to mind Virginia Woolf's assertion that at the level of the unconscious, all artists are androgynous. I identify with this and think it holds true. But out in the world, the terms come weighted. To say that an artist has no nationality or no gender is an ideal concept, which floats free of power relations, history, politics. It seems to me that there are key points when nationality and support for a national struggle can take precedence over the artist's entitlement to this ideal concept. There are times, in other words, when an artist should take a stand. I confess I'm struggling here, agreeing with both notions simultaneously. And perhaps that's okay. I can agree that the artist has no nationality when I'm at my desk and deeply engaged in my work. Here, in the imagination, I constantly board across. There are no passports, no border checks. As artists, we hold fast to the idea that the imagination is freedom, that we are not bound by where we come from. What matters is where we're going. And yet, in the material world, the welfare state is being dismantled and the Tory wolves are at the door. The people of Scotland did not vote for any of this. There is only one elected Conservative MP in the whole country. Politically, culturally, Scotland is a very different place from down south. The gap is widening. The national concerns are fundamentally different. North of the border, we are not demonising the poor. We are not demonising immigrants. We are not anti-Europe. If I lock myself in my garret at this historical moment, claiming a Mandarin neutrality because I'm an artist, when I believe that one of the many roles of the artist is to bear witness, I think I would be doing myself and my adopted country a disservice.
It's a terrific piece of writing. It's very personal, but critical as well. There were some people being interviewed yesterday on television about how they were proposing to vote or how they thought they might vote this time next year. And the commentator said it really came down to whether you were going to be ruled by your head or your heart. Are you saying that you'd be ruled by your heart?
Well, I heard Ian Rankin talking about this too, and he was kind of putting it in as a thing that runs through Scottish culture and the Scottish psyche. You know, we can go back to James Hogg, and even before that, you know, the divided self, the head and heart. I mean, I don't know whether Scottish people in the audience feel that it is a head and a heart question like that. Because I think I'm also voting with my head. You know, I think people are worried about uncertainty and worried about the future, and it seems to me that no other country before an election is forced to look in such detail at what the country will look like after something than Scotland, you know. And every day, a fear a day keeps independence away. Every day we're getting bombarded with messages that it's going to be terrible and we'll have border guards, you know, and the English will have to have their passports doubly stamped, and, you know, what's going to happen will be defenceless. But I think, you know, we have certainty. So my head, my rational side, we have certainty. Look at what's happening. The NHS is being dismantled. Education, as we value it in Scotland, is being dismantled south of the border. Libraries, the way art is seen, just as a, you know, purely economic focus on the arts. You know, this is very different to what's happening up here, and very different culturally ever since I've been here. You know, Scotland values education and health, and this more community kind of thing. So I think we know what's coming. Labour and the coalition have said they're going to keep going in this manner with austerity. What have we got to lose? So I think I'm being very rational, as well as emotional, of course. But I think I'm looking at the facts here, looking at certainty, and I prefer the uncertainty of leaping into the future.
Do you find that being commissioned to write this pamphlet crystallised your views for you?
Well, it came off another book that came out last year that I was commissioned to write an essay for, and it was off the back of that with the Sultana Poetry. It's a lovely book called Unstated, and it has 27 writers and artists were asked to contribute to this book about independence. And in that I really looked at Australia as a cautionary tale, as the dangers of constitutional monarchy, and saying that monarchy is not a benign institution, and looking at Australia. So I guess it was off the back of that, but certainly writing those two essays has crystallised a lot of my thinking, for sure.
Would this be a good point to invite questions or comments from the audience? This is such a key issue for everybody in the room.
So I really appreciated your answer to Kate's last question there about the head versus heart. It was actually just on the radio at lunchtime today. I heard a very nice riposte to that very comment. I didn't catch who it was that said it because I switched on.
And what were they saying?
And they said that there was no difference between the head and heart.
Yeah.
That there are two integral parts of the body. And one doesn't work without the other.
Exactly. And I think actually to frame it that Scottish people, the ones that will vote for, are only voting with the heart, is also to frame a kind of, we're getting back into these romantic, idealised, these wild Scots running around in kilts, noble savage kind of idea, really, north of the border, this strange place where they do things differently because they're all, this Celtic temperament. It's just a complete and utter racist nonsense.
But it's thinking with the brave heart.
That's right. We've all got brave hearts north of the border. I don't know. It just seems. I think we have to be wary of that. Just saying. That's right. As if we're disembodied north of the border, we're completely disembodied. Nobody thinks. We only act according to our heart. I mean, according to the Tibetans, here is mind. What's wrong with other cultures operate much more from here anyway. But I think the way it's framed it has a slightly racist, noble, savage tinge to it that the Scots can't think. They're not thinking rationally. Forget the Scottish Enlightenment. They don't think rationally up north of the border. Yes, there's something very odd about it.
The Scottish identity amuses me because I've worked in probate genealogy and putting families together and all sorts of ancestral research, mainly for Melbourne, for Scots who emigrated and you have to trace them. But in my studies over 30 years, I think I have found one family tree that was entirely Scottish, and we're having Alistair Moffat later on, who's the Scotland's DNA gentleman. We're all immigrants.
Yeah.
The Scots are really Irish.
Well, I think I make the point in the essay at one point, going back. At one point, Homo sapiens got up and moved from Africa. At one point, we're all descended from those original people that got on their 2 feet and wandered, And there's many writers that have looked at this notion of that our natural tendency as humans is to move and to migrate. And, Ruth Badell, Bruce Chatwin, Rebecca Solnit, we are wanderers at heart, even if we just wander, the street away from where we're born. We're still moving, aren't we? We're still. So I think that's a really great point. If we start, and I think I talk about that there. One of the dangers with looking at nationality and a certain kind of nationalism, I make an argument for what Zoe Wickham calls a strategic nationalism. She's talking about it in a South African context. I'm talking about it in a Scottish context. Because I know quite a few writers and artists who say to me, you know, oh, I'm not a nationalist, I can't be, you know, nationalism's terrible, as if it's, you know, we go from a certain kind of nationalism straight to the Nazi death camps, or straight to apartheid, you know. But I think that's an oversimplification of what nationalism is. But certainly if we base nationality solely on race, then we're in deep water, you know. And I love the way the debate has been framed. I don't know if people have seen that STV series on the road to referendum. It's fantastic, a 3-part series. And it's not about talking the people of Scotland, you know, they're not just saying the Scottish people, the people who were born here, but the people of Scotland have a big decision to make in the year to come. And there's been all these studies, I was listening to Radio 4, you know, a while back, that north of the border, us, that people with dual nationality or, you know, even triple nationalities, they do identify as Scottish and Pakistani, or you know, Pakistani, Scottish, and so on, in a way that south of the border is not as defined, you know, because I think it's framed differently up here, the people of Scotland, as opposed to where we were born, you know.
Yes, I like the way in the pamphlet you define your own nationhood as a mental landscape of those places and times that have been important to you. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of Wordsworthian idea in a way. So you can have a kind of patchwork identity, and it's an inner identity, which I like.
Yeah, I kind of took that notion of you know, Aboriginal people asking, where's your country? It's mapped in songlines and dreamlines all over Australia, and then I started to kind of tease out that notion and think, okay, where is my country? You know, okay, maybe I come down to the Royal Mile and Milton Street and Paterson Street with the Acropolis at the end of it, and you know, Hollywood Park, places and moments that we've been happy, and houses and rooms, and I think that also makes up our identity, if you like. Yeah, and our nationality, our identity is part of the nationality. But I think it's always, you know, identity is something that shifts according to what we're doing in life, what's important at that particular moment, and you know, so, and nationality is part of that, but I think that can also be a bit fluid as well.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. I think we're probably going to have to wind up now, as we only have to begin a few minutes, but it's been so interesting, really inspiring. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Lovely to be back in St Andrews. Thank you.